Everyone, and welcome to the Robert R. McCormick Museum. My name is Chris. I'm the Public Engagement Coordinator at the museum, and I'll be your guide today. Now, for those of you who have not been to this museum before, this is the country estate of Colonel Robert R. McCormick, who was the president and editor of the Chicago Tribune and founder of WGN Radio. Normally, we do talk about him, but today I thought we would do something a little bit different. You see, often in history, we overlook the women's stories. So I'm asking Robert to take a back seat today so we can focus on the powerful women's history of the McCormick family. Now, before we get started, I do just want to go over a couple of our normal museum favors. We ask that guests refrain from eating or drinking while they're in the house. However, if you do need water, please don't hesitate to drink from the water bottles you have with you. If you don't have a water bottle and need one, just let me know. We do have some scattered throughout the house in case somebody does need one. It's hot in here sometimes. Nobody should feel like they need to fall over from dehydration. We are not shouting timber on this tour. We're all going to stay standing upright today. Now, the other big museum favor I have is to make sure you're staying with me at all times. This is a 35-room Georgian Revival style mansion. And if you separate from me, you are probably going to get lost and we'll never find you again. And worst off, if you go off looking for a bathroom, you might find one of our historic toilets that isn't hooked up to the plumbing. And well, that's a mess no one wants to clean up. So on the occasion that you do need to leave the tour or you need to find a washroom, just let me know and I'll make sure to get you to the appropriate door quickly and safely. Now, were there any questions about anything before we began the tour? All right. Now, we only have 10 minutes together today, unfortunately, and that is just a criminally short amount of time. Normally, I love to talk about all the women in the family, like Illinois Congresswoman Ruth Hannah McCormick, or World War I nurse and philanthropist Amy McCormick, but I just don't have that time today. But in order to give you a good idea of what all the family women were like, how powerful all of them were, I've chosen to speak on specifically Sissy Patterson. I think she is the best one to show you that women have always bossed men, creating success and doing it with sensationalism and confidence. And hopefully by the end of today, you'll not only know that, but you'll help me in sharing these really powerful stories of some of our more local women in history. So why don't we head on into the house and get started? All right, here we are. We are in reception hall. This is the room in the home where you would have been greeted if you were a guest here at Cantini. So I figured it's a great place for us to greet the person we will be talking about today, Sissy Patterson. Now, Sissy is in this portrait with her family, her cousins, and her brother, who's sitting kitty corner from where she is standing. And in the center is the family patriarch, Joseph Medill. That's Grandpa. And Grandpa's the reason the family's even involved in media to begin with. He had bought some shares in the failing Chicago Tribune in the 1800s and flipped the paper on its head, took it from the red and put it right into the black. And later on, Sissy is going to follow in those footsteps of her grandfather. But I think we need to start at the beginning of her story. So before Sissy becomes a powerful publishing house, she starts by being an American princess. Now, what that term means is that Sissy was a wealthy American woman. She was this new moneyed American socialite. And an American princess means that she marries off to a diplomatic figure, an aristocratic figure in Europe. A lot of times back then, these European dukes and counts and lords had these failing estates, and they were able to fix them by funding them using this American money. So they'd marry these younger, impressionable American women. They would get the women's money, the women would get the titles. And Sissy does one of these marriages. She marries a Polish count named Joseph, and the two of them have a daughter together. But Sissy doesn't just get a title from this marriage, she gets a very abusive husband. He's abusive physically, emotionally, sexually, he cheats on her, and he's not turning his bank statements around. They are still plummeting downward. And eventually Sissy decides that she is going to leave this marriage. She gets up the courage and the gusto to walk away, but it does cause quite a lot of problems. Sissy's husband ends up kidnapping their daughter, and it becomes this huge thing. The president gets involved, the Tsar of Russia gets involved. It's all over the newspapers. Everyone knows who this socialite is. They already would have seen mention of her here and there because she was, of course, a countess. But now she's part of this big worldwide scandal, and everyone knows her. Kind of think of her almost like a ye old Kardashian, a ye old Kim Kardashian. Just bigger hair. Now, Sissy comes home, she gets rid of her husband. She gets her daughter back. She's back in Illinois and she marries again. She marries a lawyer named Elmer. But unfortunately, Elmer doesn't live for very long. He passes away very suddenly one day on a golf course, just drops from a heart attack. And Sissy takes the inheritance. She decides, you know what? Men have not been very helpful to me. I'm not going back to that lifestyle. I'm going to head on out and I'm going to make a name for myself. And she goes to live in Washington, D.C., where she has a family home on DuPont Circle. And that's where she really begins her story. So I'm taking us along through the house, and we're in the Colonel's sitting room now, which is really a home office here at Cantini and the home office for an editor and publisher. So that's why I'd like to tell the rest of Sissy's story in this room of the house. Sissy ends up going out to Washington, D.C. and tries to buy the Washington Herald from William Randolph Hearst. He's not interested in selling, even though the paper is failing and failing fast, but he's willing to put her in charge of it just to see what she had in mind to do with it, not thinking she could really save it. So Sissy becomes the first female editor and publisher of a newspaper in the country for a failing newspaper. And she turns it around just like her grandpa had taught her to do. Sissy uses her sensationalist background, that drama of having been this countess and these throws and this big society woman who was at the big party. She had this horrible feud with Teddy Roosevelt's daughter, Alice. Everyone knew who she was. Now, I should say in Joseph Medill's defense, that's not how he flipped a paper. He did it his own way by following Abraham Lincoln around the country. Sissy decided to put her own spin. She used what she already had on her side, this reputation, in order to get people maybe a little bit more interested in buying this morning newspaper that no one was that interested in. And once she's got them hooked, once she's got them interested based off of these really interesting and kind of bitey editorials, she takes it another step further. Now, not using her sensationalism, but using her confidence to going out and getting some of the best stories she can get for her newspaper. Here's a picture of Sissy running the Times Herald. Now, it becomes the Times Herald because she ends up convincing Hearst to lease her not only the Herald, but his nighttime edition, the Times. And then she takes both papers, convinces them to sell to her finally, and she combines them into one full newspaper. And now she needs to get some really good interviews for that newspaper. So Sissy herself goes out and interviews Al Capone. She doesn't make an appointment. She just goes and hunts him down at his home out in Florida, introduces herself and does an interview and has a one-on-one interview with him in her newspaper. She also tries to get an interview with Albert Einstein, hearing that he's visiting some people in California. She heads out, she goes to hunt him down, finds out he's on some nature hikes, but she doesn't find him hiking and exploring nature. She finds him sunbathing in the nude. And even Sissy, who's seen a lot at this point, was like, oh, that's a lot, turns on her heels and heads the other way instead. Now, probably my favorite thing about Sissy is something she said towards the end of her life in an interview about what it was like to be a female editor and publisher. She'd gotten a lot of flack and people were asking her a lot of questions of how she could handle something like that. Specifically, how could a woman be in charge of a bunch of men? And Sissy's exact quote, and I'll try to emulate Sissy as best I can. She was sitting a little bit like relaxed, goes, "Women have always bossed men. They just don't always realize it." And I think that's a really profound thought. Women have always been bossing the men. And it's not just the women themselves who might not realize they're doing it, but it's history. And it's us who don't realize they're doing it, which is why it's so important for us to remember people like Sissy Patterson and share her story. And I hope you'll help me do that when you leave here today and continue to keep her story alive, as well as all the other powerful women in history whose stories you might already know. Now, if you really enjoyed the little of Sissy's story I shared with you today, and you're interested in knowing a lot more about her, there are some books about her, and you can just type in her name, Eleanor Sissy Patterson, on Amazon, at your local library, and these books should pop up. And if you're having trouble finding them there, our research library at the First Division Museum has those books about her, and you can go read them there if you'd like. And of course, if you're interested in any more of the house history or the history of this family, make sure to check out cantini.org or any of Cantini's social media to see all the programs we have up and coming. Were there any questions about anything we learned today at all? All right. Well, if there was nothing else, then I will get you guys ready to return to the rest of your day. I want to be respectful of the amount of time I said I would spend with you, and I don't want to go over it. If you guys have any questions after the fact, I will be standing just outside the exit door over here, and I'll take those questions then. But for now, from all of us here at the McCormick House, we wish you a historic rest of your day at Cantini Park. Go out, boss some men, and create success for yourselves. Thanks, everybody. I don't know how to stop recording. There we go.